Welcome to the Public Sector Cloud, the big debate. My name is Richard Sykes. It's my privilege to chair today's session. And I'll tell you at the start, the cloud. As many definitions of the cloud as there are clouds on a summer's day. But it's real. It's actually been there for quite a while, grown up in the consumer services section, things like Google's search, Amazon's e-commerce. It's beginning to spread into the public sector and the private sector. Big, powerful players with highly automated service factories, very different economics, new commercial models, and a recognition at an early stage that this could have big impact on how government procured its services and how it got its services delivered. So it's with great pleasure that today I have three very experienced players, starting off with John Suffolk, who's been the government CIO on whose watch the cloud began to penetrate government debate, and he's led the process of understanding how to exploit that. David Wild, the CIO of Westminster, who has similarly been very innovative in bringing the cloud into local government, and the aptly named Andy McLeod, who is the lead for public sector strategy and policy for Cisco in the UK. So, gentlemen, welcome all. Look forward to a good, vigorous debate on the issue. And I think probably the right place to start is with John. The cloud, what does it really mean for the public sector?
Well, I mean, my thinking about cloud technology actually has got nothing to do with technology. It's a fundamentally different way of constructing a business and the way that you deal with the market and the way you deliver services to citizens, which is, why we're in the public sector. And so for me, it's about saying, how can I deliver services very fast, very cheap, with very little upfront money? And when that service is no longer required, I close it down with very little exit cost. It's a different way of doing business, and it is a consumer-based way of doing business, unlike the old, I will run a project, it'll be several £100 million of investment, it will take 5 years, and by the time we get to the end, the problem that we were trying to solve has shifted. Cloud changes that model.
And does that present a challenge that the government can face up to? Because what you're describing is a very different way of government working, a different way of government procuring, a different way of a lot of government departments going about their business.
Oh, it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge for politicians who, no disrespect to them, see anything to do with technology as, a little bit of a dangerous thing on their watch. It's a huge challenge to officials who are used to running things in a very vertical way. It's a huge challenge to procurement guys who like to be able to say, well, I want to pick you because I know you and I want a contract and I want it for a long time. It's a huge challenge for the technology people in terms of government because their roles fundamentally change. But more importantly, it's a huge challenge for the IT industry overall because it changes the way they have historically worked over the last 30 years. So it doesn't matter where you start from and where you look, this is a fundamental paradigm shift which actually is hitting people today.
One quick thing to get clear early in this debate, it's the lovely muddle of the English language, but of course one way the government could go with the cloud is to have its own private cloud, even though it's public, or go into the public clouds, even though they're really privately run. Where do you see the UK government headed in that direction?
Yes and yes. The reality is there is no single answer, there is no single bullet. So, for example, we have to worry about loss of life in terms of government. So, if you were in the Victims Witness Protection Scheme, you wouldn't want your identity to go out because bad things would happen to you. So that's classified information. That has to be protected, and it's very, very hard to do that where you don't know where your data is, or your data is offshore, or it's being provided via third parties who provide services to non-government departments as well. So it's unlikely at the higher classification levels we would move that kind of data into those worlds. But if it's low classification stuff, if it's unclassified, does it matter who provides it? The answer is no, of course it doesn't. And if you think about citizens today when they're doing their banking, they're doing online transactions, they have no idea where that information is going. So you have all their banking information popping up in all kinds of strange parts around the world. So government will operate both models and multiple variations of those models over time.
Now that's a very helpful lead in to David, because David in Westminster,
Yep.
you've moved into the cloud. My understanding is you've done significantly with what would be called a private cloud, even though it's actually a public cloud, because of course
Yes.
Westminster City Council is a public operation.
Indeed.
Tell us a bit more of what you've done in the background.
I mean, it's not dissimilar to what John's been describing. You know, we've moved our core IT services over to a complete managed service. It's sitting in Rotherham now. Does it really matter to Westminster? No, it works. It's cheaper, it's effective, and we can scale it in line with the kind of business models we expect to see with cloud. Are we concerned about you know, how that information is constructed in terms of the infrastructure? No. You know, the responsibilities with the supply side on that. It was interesting, I was having a conversation with one of John's colleagues in the Cabinet Office a couple of days ago about definition of public and private. One of the things I'd like to see lifted, you know, taken off the table is this public-private cloud debate, because actually the issue is about commercial, it is about information governance, and you can get those two things right, and you can get the contractual construct right. We stop having this debate about, to my mind, the Google version of the world. You know, have a public cloud because we want you to buy our services, versus the private cloud, which is a system integrated view of the world. Actually, do I care? No. I just want to see what's best price and what meets those minimum standards that I have to make sure, you know, those suppliers comply with around governance. So public cloud, private cloud, no, doesn't work for me. I think cloud and commercial offerings does work, and clarity around what I'm getting for my money does work. So, you know, can we shift the debate on a bit from that public-private thing, take the marketing speak out from the supply side, and actually maybe retake some of the initiative as buyers of those services around what it is we mean by the cloud.
But let's push you a little on that.
Yeah, sure.
If the market had
Yeah.
come at you with some very good services immediately available for your email and everything like that,
Yeah.
that didn't require you to consolidate round Rotherham, but allowed you to take it straight out of the cloud, would that have been a solution that Westminster would have been equally open to?
If the price range is right, if the commercial model stacks up, and if they can assure me that the information governance and minimum standards I have, which we all know about, you know, it's
Right.
compliance with Data Protection Act, Freedom of Information, RIPA, all of that stuff. If they can do that, yes. I mean, it is as simple as that. To me, it's absolutely about the business case. It's never been about how somebody has chosen to package their solution. I don't buy the vision from a particular supplier.
So this is very much about a marketplace that's developing and growing.
Indeed.
And
very
at a
much so.
particular point in time, you make the best judgment from that marketplace.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. I mean, there are some interesting facets to cloud which I think are around the applications piece, you know, the line of business systems piece, where I think it's hugely immature, that particular bit of the market, but certainly for us in the public sector, it's the area of greatest gain over the next 2 to 4 years if we're going to take significant cost out.
We do need to be careful, though. There is a tremendous amount of fibbing that goes on in the IT industry in terms of here is the next holy grail.
Yes.
If you go back probably no more than 18 months, cloud really wasn't in the lexicon. It was all about green IT and sustainable. And every conference you went to was washed with green.
Yeah.
Now everything's washed with cloud. And as you're quite rightly saying, every supplier is saying, here's my cloud, here's my cloud. And you peel away the covers and you say, and it is different how? Well, it's cloud. And is it cheaper? And can you do the stuff? No, but it's cloud. And you go, okay, guys, you don't quite get it. So there is a lot of fibbing going on. And understandably, there's a lot of people who are saying, they see the threat from cloud and they're trying to protect their current position. And the best way to protect your current position is to do what you've always done. So most people are now seeing through that.
And internally, I think in government, we're suffering quite badly from that as well, because the preserve of the IT techies is not to embrace cloud, but actually to try and dress up what they've got as cloud. And it's one of my big frustrations with colleagues in public sector, both in central and local government.
Sure.
As soon as I hear a government department saying, I've got a cloud, hang on, you've missed the point. In the same way that if I hear a council say, I'm building a council cloud, you're not taking advantage of the marketplace there. What you're trying to do is preserve what you've got. Now, there's validity in obviously sweating assets that you've got, but I mean, my take on that is see what I can get for it as part of a negotiated deal, come back to the commercial side.
Going to come back to that in a moment, because I think there's some important issues in that, but I'd like to bring Andy into the debate, because here you are, a major, long, well-established supplier. At the time that Cisco was born, it didn't come straight into the market and place and say, we are about the cloud. So where is the cloud with Cisco now? Is Cisco buried in the cloud, or is Cisco driving the cloud? What about Cisco and the cloud?
Okay, well, Cisco's got a fundamental part to play in the cloud, in the same way that we played a fundamental part in the growth of the internet. But the first thing I'd like to do is just to put into context the issue about the marketing in the cloud, because the first thing is industry is doing ourselves a disservice with all this FUD around cloud. John and David answered your question about what they were after, which is good value, preferably low-cost compute, preferably on a pay-as-you-go basis, so that you don't have to own the asset, total cost of ownership is lower, etc., etc. Those are the sorts of models that have been developing in the consumer marketplace, from the Googles and the Amazons, etc. And it's called cloud computing. And so all of industry has lifted this cloud computing, and we actually get stuck in the whole phrase. And actually, it doesn't really matter. It is about the commercial construct. I absolutely agree it's about the commercial construct. With consumer cloud, clearly there are benefits of economies of scale, again, with the Googles and the Amazons, and actually they have different business models. I think where the industry that's supplying government, and John was saying it's 65% outsourced.
Central government, yeah.
The big systems integrators, they do not have a culture of build it and they will come, unlike the telcos. Yes. Telcos have a culture of build it and they'll come. SIs don't. It's tailor-made. It's made to order. That is a fundamentally different business model. Right. Completely different commercial contracts, and they're struggling at the moment. They're struggling at the moment to work out how to provide the market with what the market wants. So where's Cisco's part in this? Clearly we're a large company. The network cloud is a fairly network-centric model. Over the last 3 to 4 years, we have grown our data center involvement now into the server market. And so there's 3 areas. On the one hand, we have some products. We have cloud products such as WebEx for conferencing. We have IronPort ScanSafe for security. But the second and the most key area is we're building solutions with our partners, because we're indirect, to help accelerate the market. Two examples there would be vBlock with EMC and VMware to build flexible, single-stop, low total cost of ownership compute. Another example at the other end of the scale would be unified communications as a service. So telephony is one of the oldest cloud applications. With 6 million staff in public sector, under the operational efficiency program, if we can get them working better together, that's a good thing. So a second area would be unified communications as a service, working with the major service providers. And the last area, with our large global footprint and huge investment in technology and innovation, is trying to help remove some of the major barriers to what we call cloud computing, which is universal, ubiquitous computing, and that's trust, it's security, and it's interoperability. Yeah. So three areas.
I'm going to bring us back to some of those again shortly, but there you are positioned very clearly as a supply side, a vendor, developing a range of options and opportunities. And one of the questions I get asked from audiences is where are the barriers to this change? Why isn't it happening more rapidly? And someone in an audience the other day said to me, why did all these players go for the consumer marketplace first, rather than go into the big enterprise and government marketplace first? And I say, well, it's very simple. The consumer doesn't have an IT department, and the consumer doesn't have legacy systems. And those are big, significant barriers to change, as you gentlemen have already addressed. So if we just come back to what stands between, a little more focused detail of the changes we got to bring. John, if I come back to you, I mean, government has a tremendous variety of payroll systems, tremendous variety of desktop capabilities and things like that. IT departments see this change potentially as opportunity, potentially as a loss of opportunity. How can you actually begin the process of change so that these capabilities that are beginning to come out of the vendor community can be drawn on?
Well, one of the things I said to the last government was the worst thing that you ever did was to give people too much money. Because when you've got lots of money in your pocket, you can go out and buy any old tat
Right.
and any old system and replicate to your heart's content and not have to team with anybody else. Now that we have no money, the harsh reality is people cannot continue to do what they have always done, and that's a very, very important point.
Right.
People make better decisions when they've got no cash. The second thing is, if you don't mind, I'm going to pick on you because you're really local authorities, and we have to pick on local authorities. We have lots of local authorities, lots of health, lots of police, lots of central governments, all reinventing the wheel. You've gone to Rotherham, fantastic. It'd be nice that 399 other local authorities go to Rotherham as well, because that's the concept of a cloud. Moving from A to B is interesting, but it's not a fundamental shift. So the first issue is you have no cash, and that will always be a burning platform. The second issue is, and I'd pick up on some of the things said a moment ago about Cisco's positioning, is the market has to shift. Everyone says, well, you kind of would like pay for use, wouldn't you? Well, of course. We want no entry costs, no exit costs. We don't care about technology. Everyone thinks cloud is about technology. It is and it isn't. I am totally agnostic, and I've always been agnostic whether I'm running on a Microsoft or an IBM or an OpenX or an OpenY. I absolutely don't care. I care about am I actually reducing death rates from cancer. The technology is irrelevant. But the SI market and the technology market overall is built on I will sell your product. I will buy your product. You give me a little bit of marketing money because I'm selling your product. So the reality is the market has to reposition itself. So when we go out to tender, say we went out to tender for, I don't know, a new tax system, heaven forbid. If suppliers don't bid in a different way, you get what you've always got. So there has to be a massive market shift. The third thing that has to happen is ministers have to take an interest by saying, you haven't got any capital, and I want this up and run quickly, and I don't want it to be done the other way. And Parliament needs to take an interest, because if they don't, what's going to change? If there's no pressure from the top, then in essence we will not get that strategic shift. And my worry is we live in a world where anything technology-based, never mind cloud-based, kind of like glazes the eyes over most politicians and most senior officials. Right. So you're left with the same group of people, some wanting to change the world, some not wanting to change the world.
Now,
so
let me challenge you on one key aspect of that change. You've got a tremendous spread of existing outsourcing contracts and arrangements and deals in central government. In the main, those are well-established, detailed contracts with time to run, and they are with the suppliers who are not always the innovative suppliers who are bringing in the new commercial models. So they aren't with the Ciscos or the Amazons or the Googles or people like that. So how does the government address that issue of repositioning itself in the marketplace with a more fresh balance of suppliers when it's got this great contractual overload that's tying it to the companies that have not always been the most innovative in bringing these new models in?
Well, I wouldn't agree with you on a whole host of points. I mean, I see some great innovation from big organisations well established, because government, whether you accept this or not, it's a matter of fact that we have to be pushing the boundaries of technology. When you're doing with some of the top-end stuff that we're doing, in all kinds of ways, there's a lot of innovation going on there. But I would say this to you. If you were one of those companies and you had lots of contracts stacked up, and you had all this cloud debate going on around you, pay for use, no investment, and you yourself were not changing, what do you reckon would happen to your business in 10 years' time? It goes down the pan. So they themselves want to be preemptive, hence why you were saying they're all coming up with their cloud. For example, I get invites to conferences to learn about John Suffolk's cloud strategy. Very interesting, given that I wrote most of it, and suppliers are writing books on our strategy. So everybody's trying to reposition themselves, because they know when those contracts run off, when we've gone for pay for use, we've gone to Rotherham, we've done different things, they know they will not be able to replace that revenue.
So what you're telling us is that actually behind the scenes, a lot of those major players are very open to major renegotiations of existing contracts so that they can begin readjusting their business models in good time.
Some are, some aren't.
Right. And they've got deep pockets, so they can afford to do it.
But again, it's what I said earlier, this is a huge shift for people.
Right.
We have brought up an IT industry that we basically say, the more you sell, the more money you make. You then come along, it's a pay-for-use contract. Well, how does that work from the accounting treatment around the various laws of the land, whether it be in England or in America or anywhere else? Not much to book if it's pay-for-use, because you don't have a very long contract. What's the incentive scheme then? How do I kind of like build a different kind of relationship? So people are very willing. So I think I've probably had every systems integrator in my room saying, John, what you are doing breaks my business model. How do I now construct a new business model for the cloud-based world? So we're all feeling our way through this, and that's where I'm spending most of my time now, helping people out, saying, unless you change, you will be dead in 10 years' time.
Right. And at the same time, there are very active in the marketplaces people, companies, who are pursuing the new business models
Absolutely
very aggressively. To the best of my knowledge, Amazon Elastic Cloud is not based on a lot of 5 to 10 year contracts.
Well, it wouldn't be, would it? But again, let's not get overly excited or seduced by a Google or an Amazon or X, Y, and Z. They are brilliant at some things. But then when I say, let's go and put taxation processing on there, which is a variable workload, they say, we're not really built for that. So I think it's a horses for courses. Would I move, you know, the low-end stuff into those environments? Absolutely so, and they do a brilliant job. So we have to learn from the Amazons, the eBays, the Googles, but we also have to learn from the big boys who know how to do big stuff. And there is a difference in the way you do them.
The heavy lifters.
The heavy lifters.
We still need the heavy lifters.
You do need the heavy lifters.
Yeah.
If we go into local government, David, if we think in terms of the heavy lifters, but look at the fact that local government is very fragmented, you've made major changes, you've moved to Rotherham, you're gaining all the efficiencies of a more virtualised environment. Yeah. But the fact is that local government still has a myriad of revs and bends systems, a myriad of payroll systems. Do you really need more than 2 or 3 revs and bends, or 2 or 3 payroll systems across local government?
It's actually worse than that. It's not about a myriad of systems. What's annoying, what's frustrating about the local government market is there are lots of instances of the same system sold by the same company in an extremely inefficient way. Right. Because, yeah, that's the way, as John said, that's the way the public sector has driven the marketplace, partly through legislative change and controls, partly through democratic, devolution, all that kind of stuff, and also, I think, actively encouraged by the industry itself, because if you want to make 30% margin on something, make it 300 times and sell it to 300 customers, you'll do quite well out of it. If you create a virtualized instance and do it on a multi-company basis, where we'd want to be, your margin probably comes right down. And it's that kind of fundamental rethink in the market that we need to see happening. But breaking that is very difficult. The added complication in local government is we have a serious stagnation problem in both in innovation and generally in our sort of technology delivery out there, because there are so few players in what I would call the market segment. I mean, I don't look at IT as a market segment in local government. I look at environmental services, social care. They're the market segments we operate in. So our challenge, and what cloud is helpful for me, and I'm quite sort of shameless about using this, is trying to disrupt the IT market by actively encouraging the other service providers, the traditional service providers in those spaces. So, waste management companies, and actually starting dialogue with those and getting those companies to actually start engaging with IT on our behalf. It's amazing how different the conversation becomes in that case. Also, when you then play that into political scenario and into sort of chief exec decisions and what have you in local government, it's their decisions they get. They understand the total business proposition, and IT is no longer something that sits in the corner and works its magic. It's an integral part of the process. When you get that, you get people's attention. And then when you start addressing efficiencies and changing the marketplace around that total service offering, you've got something that people understand.
So your answer to that is, could have been, well, in order to bring this all to a more coherent system across local government, we really want central government to begin issuing some diktats and some guidance and things like that.
We want central government to stop issuing something.
But what you're saying is rather I can really work the market to this, and I'm encouraging the market and different types of suppliers, new types of suppliers to come and break. So let's turn to Andy on this.
Can I come in there? I'm sorry, I think that's baloney. I can't see that working in a 400 local authority world where you may be a leader, and you absolutely are, and there are others like Birmingham. The reality is, just as it's true in terms of central government, well, it's easy to get our arms around central and you can tell them what to do, ministers can. Unless local authorities, the chief execs and the people begin to say, you know, we don't want 400 data centres, we don't want to buy the same software 1,000 different times, the market will never shift because there's no incentive to shift. And I sit here, you know, listening onto TV after TV saying local authorities are now making people redundant, thinking, well, that's your choice. You choose to make people redundant because you don't want to bite the bullet on all this overlap and duplication. Central government will never dictate to local authorities because of the way the law is constructed. So I sit here thinking, what is going to be the real stimulus? Because I don't see people sitting up by saying, you know, boys, we're going to have to work together. It's a terrible thing to suggest, I know, but we're going to have to work together.
From a supplier perspective, the market will eventually go to what we all understand as being cloud, managed services or cloud eventually. I think it's simply a question of how fast in public sector and when can public sector start to enjoy the benefits. The one area that we haven't discussed, we've discussed the fact that the cost per user will go down and therefore the profit for the supplier is less. Actually, the other side of the equation is there is a good opportunity because if I'm selling a CRM system or an HR system or a waste bin collecting system into 400 local authorities, there's a cost of sale associated with that. And I have a very heavy pre-sales engineering group, expensive suited booted salespeople and marketing, etc. If we can understand the top 2 or 3 CRM systems that are very good for local government, put those into a government application store, which by the way could be a federated application store across local government, picked up by Rotherham, picked up by Westminster or whoever, then the cost of sale is going to be almost zero.
So now let me challenge Cisco. Is there? Cisco has a strong balance sheet. It has a good cash mountain.
We do, yeah.
It's a determined company that has acted with vision many times in the past. So what would UK government do, maybe doesn't need to do anything more, that would lead Cisco now to move in, make major investment, come to local government with an absolutely standardized services, offer to take over Rotherham, make it a highly effective data centre for servicing
something
whole lot of local
qualify
government?
Rotherham, because I think we're getting bogged down in Rotherham. What I've actually done is I've moved it to a managed service provider that happens to have a dirty great commercial offering out there. And we're actually sitting in an environment that's 80% private sector, 20% public sector. So,
Right.
So
you're already multi-tenanted environment.
Absolutely right.
We're going to come back to that.
Okay.
My question, I suppose,
Still
to Andy is...
confusing it with Rotherham Borough Council.
No.
Totally different thing.
See what I mean about sharing? Don't want to go anywhere near Rotherham Borough Council.
No, I think they're in there with us.
Back to Andy and Cisco.
Yes.
I mean, Cisco could make a significant move and suddenly take a large chunk of marketplace, highly efficient, highly effective.
So it's a tempting but it's also a very frustrating market. So public sector's around about 17 billion. But actually you're fairly insular if you're just looking at UK public sector market at 17 billion because governments are fairly similar around the world.
Right.
Health, local government,
Right.
schools, education are again fairly similar around the world. For us in Cisco, the rough figures are around about 25% of our business here in the UK's public sector. That's fairly, and globally the figures are around about the same. So it's a very tempting, very big number. And all we simply need John to do is to aggregate all of that demand and then mandate it. That's clearly not going to happen with our constitution. And as I said, the SIs, the major SIs are struggling with build it and they will come. So my own belief, having worked for 18 months on the G-Cloud programme, spent much time with the OGC, the buying people, the CESG security people, with the commercial people and with industry, is that the market will find its way. The market always does find its way. And therefore, I think there are going to be hybrid models. And forget the technology. We've already agreed it's not about technology. It is about the contractual relationship. It is about the commercials. So from a vendor perspective, it's risk and reward. I think it's fairly easy for us to identify the risk because we can simply add up the costs. The hard bit is identifying the reward. So what we're doing in public sector in the UK, in conjunction with our customers, is trying to work out what are the services that will be required, what are the numbers, what level of commitment do we guess there's going to be, and then we will do a risk reward what we call build, operate and transfer with our partners. So we will build, for example, at the moment, a collaboration system for central government based upon one major government department who wants to outsource that. And we're going to justify the risk-reward business model based upon the fact that we think there's a total available market for this particular application of 220,000. There are 15 departments who said they'd be quite interested if the costs were low enough and the SLAs were appropriate. There are about 55,000 of those. And we've worked out it's X thousand over a 2-year period, so we're talking about hybrid models now. If we can get X thousand users onto that system over a 2-year period, we're going to break even. So now we've got something on the table to be able to build a service for government that hopefully will be a huge improvement on that particular application that's currently being hosted 17 times. So risk and reward, and I think that our job is try and work out what that demand is, try and help to aggregate it, and then using the 35 billion, try and help to fund the build this and they will come.
John, you've got a government which you helped support as government CIO in its initial months of operation, and you're still there for your final months. It's very determined to get cost out. It's very determined to get things. Do you just feel that the vendor community is just being a bit too dilly-dallyish? They should be pushing on. They're pushing on an open door. They should be doing.
If we were sitting in Singapore now, I do a lot of work with the Singapore government. They say, John, we build and they will come. We're putting gigabit into the home. We don't know whether they're going to use it, but the reason why all the major cloud centres are going into Singapore because the people are investing ahead of the curve. Yeah. So your question about the 35 billion, the answer was, unless we can really work out the business case, we ain't going to be using much of our money. Well, the reality is in cloud-based world, that's the old model. You know, the new model is, I'm afraid, you've got a service and you want us to use it, fine, pay for use. If you don't want us to use it, fine, we won't use it. We'll use somebody else's. That's the harsh reality of life. And you're absolutely right. Every company, including Cisco, sitting there thinking, I've got an old world, which I've done brilliantly at growing Cisco to be a world leader. Yeah. I look ahead and I see dangers. Everything is shifting. Now, how do I protect my brilliant world that I have spent so much time and effort and passion creating and protect that into the new world? And everybody is being cautious. But the reality is someone, and you touched on this right at the beginning, is going to come along and break the model. You know, Skype will come along and say, you know, boys, what have we got to lose? We can compete with all this collaborative nonsense. Here you go, whack Skype in the middle of a secure network, you're off and running. And then they'll start picking up the edge of the services and they'll eat other people's lunch or whoever it might be.
But now let me challenge you on that, because the government is still, from what I read, making some significant barriers there. The concerns on security and things like that, the talk of the G Cloud is that it's only going to be the most lowest levels of incident level 1, 0, 1 that will be allowed to go out onto the public cloud. If the government could say, let's work with industry so we can get everything up to incident level 3, let us say, in the public cloud, that would be a real encouragement to the private sector to invest.
You're right, and that's why G Cloud design is pitched at impact level 3.
It is.
It is. Most local authorities, correct me if I'm wrong here, tend to run at 2.
Yep.
Most central government departments tend to run at 3, apart from some very sensitive data, you know, violent and sex offenders is running at 4. You get into 4, it gets hugely complicated. Right. 3, we can manage. But again, it does come, there are some constraints, let's be realistic about this, and we do need to be realistic about protecting sensitive data, but the design is about level 3.
So,
and of course, if you can do 3, you can do 2.
Then you can go out into the public cloud.
You can go out into the internet and do all those nice things.
And therein, by the way, does lie an opportunity for industry.
Right.
I'll go back to this point about hybrid models, and I'm going to say that what we're saying to our partners is that there is a first mover opportunity. Yeah, now, I know that sounds odd with cloud, because cloud's supposed to be 30 days, not sticky, but actually there is a first mover opportunity. I don't know a single procurement officer who would put their major systems on a 30-day contract at the moment. They would like the security of 2 years. So there is first mover opportunity because of some of the complexities and because government is slightly different.
But 2 years is very different from a 5 or 10 year contract.
Absolutely.
So you're breaking tradition already.
It is back to the hybrid models. And layer 3, you know, if you wanted to pick if you wanted to pick one particular service that would fly, you know, like hotcakes at the moment, it would be IL3 infrastructure as a service.
Right.
Because the major demand, I think, for that would be the systems integrators, who I said are struggling at the moment in developing that,
Right.
would use IL3 infrastructure as a service as a platform to provide what they want to provide, which is software as a service, and then the business process outsourcing to go with that. In other words, they want to back off the risk to the IaaS supplier.
Right.
And the second thing, and I don't know the quantities, but we know the percentages, is IL3 infrastructure as a service is a very good platform for taking 80% waste of test and development in government, with everyone having their own test and
It's madness, isn't it?
Right.
This is what I'm saying. We choose as a government, we choose as a local authority to be inefficient. It's our choice. We choose to go out and buy thousands of blooming test servers. We choose to buy the same software 1,000 times. That's because, in essence, the reality is we don't do a good enough job because we've had too much money. And, you know, I will watch with interest over the next 5 years to see whether that position actually changes, because the modelling we did on cloud, even with the most extreme sensitivities like adding 200% contingency in, still said you could save 4 billion cash a year. That's a lot of teachers, that's a lot of nurses, that's a lot of doctors, that's a lot of police. You know, and the reality is, if you want to take the money's there, and it's real basic stuff. As you say, it does change the market. But if you don't want to take it, you cannot complain. You forfeit the right to complain that IT in the UK government is inefficient, because you choose it to be so.
Back into the local government environment.
Yeah, I mean, picking up a couple of things. I
Great
think,
freedom of manoeuvre there.
yeah, I mean, certainly on the, you know, just coming back on John's earlier point about, you know, how do we get local government to move? I think the grant settlement's making people focus in, and frankly, brutally, if you want local government to shift, take a lot of money out, it'll shift, it has to. And that's already happening. So at sort of political leadership level, at chief exec level, at sort of board member level, you're seeing that commitment. The work I'm doing currently with Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea, you know, we're driving that stuff very, very aggressively. And then we hit the next. It's almost like trench warfare. It's like the Somme. This, you get over that hurdle. So great. So the leadership says, let's do it. Then you hit the next set of trenches. The next set of trenches are procurement. And I have little patience with a lot of what I hear about this. We have a situation, I think, in public sector procurement where we love to overcomplicate. We love to find all the reasons why we can't possibly award a contract in less than 2 years from concept, in a market that does complete refresh in 12 to 18 months. So what you end up buying typically is something that's about to go out of support in 2 years. So that kind of mindset needs to change completely. And we in public sector collectively, it's a central and local government thing, need to get a lot harder, I think, and a lot less risk averse, I think, around some of our procurement behaviours. Yeah, we love creating rules. We love creating rules.
Now, if you're to take one key area of that, UK has a tremendous spread of very innovative small to medium-sized enterprises.
Absolutely.
They face government procurement, very difficult. These big changes, we're talking about the big players, deep-pocketed, the Ciscos of the world who've got big investment. Is this the end of the opportunity for the small to medium enterprise,
No, I
or
mean,
does this open up the opportunity for the small to medium-sized enterprise?
I think it's either. I mean, you know, I've gone out and I've got innovative people in because just you take a common sense approach. Small innovative providers are not going to go for a £2 million contract. They're not in that game.
No.
But they might have an innovative solution that will grow. And actually, the big players here are always watching that market. And the ones that float, the ones that work, these guys end up buying up, and you can bring them into the bigger contracts over time. What we need to do, though, in public sector is at least open the door to let these guys have a go. Now, procurement rules let you do that. I've procured services at £50,000, £60,000, £100,000. They're all below the threshold. I do it on 3 tenders. It takes me 4 weeks, and it works for that market, and it works for us. There's nothing stopping us playing that game.
Does the cloud help here, John?
Oh,
Government keeps on saying we want more SMEs.
Yeah.
Well, some do. Some people in government do, and some people say, well, God, it's complex dealing with SMEs. I prefer a big fella, you know, because I can bash him over the head. So it's not a universal view, I have to say. But the cloud, and importantly the App Store, is the killer. And it's really quite interesting. Well, I used the contemporary language of application store when we were designing this, which was probably a bad move because everyone thought of their iPhone, etc. But it is interesting how it got people thinking. So I had a company come to me and said, John, this App Store thing, we do medical reporting in hospitals. And we go in and we do analytics, you know, what's the cost of a hip operation, what's the cost of a drug. But every technology in every hospital is different. So it's not a physical product that we have to sell. But could we kind of like put our product in your app store with a service wrapper around it, gold, silver, bronze, download it, and it's 10 quid and, you know, that kind of stuff. And I said, well, yeah, why not? So people were coming up, SMEs, with different ideas on how to use the App Store. The interesting thing, their view was always, we don't get much money off government, it's quite hard to bid, but by creating the App Store, you give us exactly the same visibility as the big boys with the big sales teams.
Right.
Now you've levelled the playing field, and we'll be delighted to do you a deal for government, because we don't have salespeople, so one deal is better than troops in around 400 local authorities and 60 departments. So it is quite interesting. That App Store was 100% geared up to bring SMEs and innovation, because what I want to do is I want to disintermediate the IT stack so no one can control us all vertically, disintermediate the technology at the bottom lane so we can deploy any application on any technology stack, which of course is what the SMEs want. And the SMEs are saying, well, if I'm doing great work in 3 local authorities and that's in the App Store, I'm more likely to sell that to another 5 or 6. But again, that takes vision in government. That takes people to get off their backsides and to make it happen. And it's not difficult to do. But if you bring those SMEs in, boy, will we see a big change from a UK economy perspective.
I
You
think
were
also.
Cisco was an SME once.
We were indeed.
Now, what have you learned from the experience of being an SME? Is what John's talking about true?
So, the biggest thing that SMEs can bring is the innovation. It absolutely is the innovation. And by the way, I wouldn't limit it to just SMEs, because in the hospital in Rotherham there may well be a great little application that they've written there. For hospital porters to locate wheelchairs or beds.
Yeah.
And actually they'd probably make that available free of charge. You could quarantine it, you won't put a big SLA on it, but in the application store, if 100 people vote that actually this is a really good application and we'll actually start to rely on this, then it turns into a commercial proposition. Will an SME or a large SI pick up that application, make it enterprise robust, and then start providing it as a service, you know, for 97 pence per user per month. And now you've got real innovation into the health sector, real cost reduction. So there was, in the G-Cloud program, Richard and I, I'll talk for myself actually, there was a huge support for the concept of an application store and quite a few of the principles of the application store. And we were disappointed that there's been a lapse over the last 3 to 6 months, because that, you know, you can, there are 2 opposite actions you can take if you want to achieve, you know, the end of more innovation, lower cost. One is you could, right, we will reduce our number of data centres, we'll have data centre consolidation, but actually data centres, or you could take it from the applications perspective and just start to provide applications that people will use. And actually, in time, those will be delivered as a cloud service anyway. And so the application store, we thought, was a fairly low cost, very complex politically and legally, but a low cost way of catalysing innovation in the market.
Can I just challenge one thing?
We're running tight on time.
Okay.
So you're going to have to challenge me quickly.
It's complex legally, etc. Is it? Taxpayers go out.
No, frankly.
Absolutely, it's not.
No.
Taxpayers go out and buy software. We own the IP, and then we're told you can't use the stuff that we've already paid for. Excuse me. And if we've got, as you were saying, so much asset and software and creativity which we've already paid for, used around the public sector, get it all in the App Store, it gives visibility, and we begin to reuse what we already own.
Yeah.
I don't think that's complex, and I don't think it's a legal challenge.
And actually, we've been doing it with hardware for the best part of 15 years.
I sense a degree of common ground emerging from this big debate. Going to give John here an opportunity for a quick final word. You're leaving the government, you're going off to your pig farm up in the Peak District and travelling the world. Where do you see this going over the next few years?
I think we're going to go into a hiatus for a year as government repositions itself, as you change a lot of people around. Then the harsh reality of life will kick in, which says this is the only solution for government.
Right.
And the interesting thing is every country I work in, I'm helping a lot of governments around the world, they're all, I'm in Moldova next week, they're copying, and the report wasn't done by me, it's done by USAID for Moldova. putting an app store in, going cloud computing, and in 18 other countries that I've spent time in, they're all doing the same thing. UK government will do it. I think they're going to be a bit too slow, though.
And on that note, I'm going to thank all three of you for a vigorous and good debate. So Andy from Cisco, thank you very much. David from the viewpoint of local government. And John, as you go off into the world as a more global pig farmer with a very strong interest in the cloud in different ways. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you.